Welcome to the Parallel Structure. I am your host, Jamie Lovejoy, and I am so glad you are here with me today for this podcast that explores mass psychogenic illnesses. Today we are going to cover 6 ordinary things that are necessary for a collective or mass delusion and what you can do to guard yourself from such subconscious espionage and undue influence. Before we begin, smash that like button, please, and subscribe to this channel. Turn on all notifications so that you can get the latest in extraordinary popular delusions and contagious madness. So last week we talked about the Seattle windshield pitting epidemic. The link to that episode is in the description below. Let me just summarize really quickly. So all of a sudden, in March of 1954, people in the surrounding neighborhoods of Seattle, they began to notice that their windshields were being pitted by, well, they thought vandals and maybe some sort of mysterious forces. And these reports, they escalated and the phenomena creeped closer and closer to Seattle. And when it started to show up in Seattle, newspapers ran headlines. The entire city was under siege. Finally, after declaring a state of emergency, the governor enlisted scientists that took a look at the scenario, and what they found really was completely unbelievable given the mass panic that spread and the intensity of the panic. The pitting had been there all along. So you're probably thinking, I have never suffered a collective delusion in my life. Maybe you have actually suffered a collective false belief. We all have them. Here's a really good example. Think back to the 1990s. You might have seen the movie Shazam, right? Remember the comedian Sinbad? He was a genie. The story goes that Shazam was this incompetent, bumbling genie. He granted wishes to kids. And right now, you might have a mental picture in your mind. Sinbad's arms are crossed, he's wearing the color purple, got big gold earrings on, right? The whole bit. But actually, that movie never existed. I know, you don't believe me, but go ahead and Google it. And although there are some Shazam truthers out there who attribute the prevalence of this collective memory to a supernatural cause, such as maybe a parallel universe, the simpler explanation is that Shazam never existed, and it's in fact a confluence of several things that are creating a collective false memory in many people's minds. It's really important that we go over terms and have just the background basics for what these things mean and how they affect the mind and the body. Collective delusions happen when false perceptions and exaggerated beliefs spread quickly in a population. But with these delusions, people connect things in their mind that aren't actually related, even though the things actually really do exist in reality. There's also another phenomena called mass hysteria or mass psychogenic illness. And unlike collective delusions, mass hysteria, it manifests a physical illness or reaction, and it doesn't have a physical cause. So there is no existing cause in reality. It's all in the head. As an article in the Skeptical Inquirer put it in July of 2000, written by Robert Bartholomew and Enric Good, all mass hysterias are collective delusions, as they involve false or exaggerated beliefs, but only rarely do collective delusions involve a mass hysteria, because in order for it to be a mass hysteria, it has to report actual physical symptoms. But regardless, there are 6 causes, very important to recognize them. If you start seeing that your life has any of these circumstances around, you might want to take stock of how many. 1, maybe 2, you're okay. But if you start seeing all 6, it's time maybe to take a vacation, do a little introspective work, and wonder, am I experiencing a mass delusion or in a psychogenic, am I having psychogenic issues? This is what you all have waited for. The 6 things necessary to cause a mass hysteria. Number 1, reduction of new ideas and insular spaces. So the manifestation of psychogenic illnesses typically happen when there's a small, tightly knit group or a group in an enclosed setting where there's little to no inflow of what I call new or revising information. Within the space, there is some shared condition where everyone is participating in a similar task or they're undergoing some similar set of stressors, but there's no inflow of information to revise the reaction. In the past, mass hysteria has broken out in places like schools or small towns, factories, even concerts. So while a collective delusion can spread across large populations, like we saw in Seattle, the way it spreads is because of a media or a narrative that helps connect those populations together. In a mass psychogenic situation, there is a complete reduction or control of revising information, or maybe a rejection altogether. The rejection, of course, could be completely unconscious, which could happen in a collective delusion or a mass psychogenic illness. I've mentioned revising information, and it might be self-explanatory, but let's get into what I mean by that. Revising information is any information that would alleviate the escalation of the delusion. After all, a delusion has a life cycle, so initially it spreads very fast. There's a rapid escalation. It adds to their anxiety and it adds to the distortions. So, for example, say you're in a large group of people sitting around a campfire on a moonlit night. A fog starts to fill the woods and it's billowing around, and suddenly you witness a giant bright light coming over the tree line toward you. You point it out to the group, and at first it's not a big deal, but it's low and hovering, and it's not making a sound, or so you think. Everyone begins to look in the direction of the light, and some people, they start muttering the words UFO to kind of diffuse the tension, and there's some jokes, and some people, because this is a strange thing, begin to add their expertise to the situation. It's really dark, so they're not seeing much, and the fog is not helping, right? Eventually, some people stand up from the camp chairs and turn toward the light. And at this point, now they're noticing this difference in behavior. These people stood up and are walking toward the light. And a few walk out of the group to get a closer look, and so the group is looking at them. And suddenly, one of the people on the far side of your camp says, "It's a helicopter." Whew. Right? That was close. It could have been an alien. Everyone giggles, they settle back into their chairs, and then they go back to talking and around the campfire and drinking the beer, and the thread is over, right? The revising information in this case came from the person who stood up and looked at the edge of the tree line, saw, oh yeah, it's moving different than what you would expect for a UFO. Oh, maybe they heard the sound of the helicopter, and it helped them know that the threat was over. The benefit of revising information is that it disarms the nervous system and it takes you out of that narrow focus that comes with anxiety, where we focus on the threat. One can actually imagine that if the helicopter had not been spotted, the light lingered just a little bit longer, or followed by strange rustling sensations in the woods, the situation could have escalated. How extreme the escalation would be would really depend on whether the group had some fear of the dark, fear of UFOs, they may have had anxiety-prone temperaments in general, that sort of thing. It's really important to remember the intake of revising information can either be self-inflicted, as it's rejected because it doesn't make it through the panic or a narrative that has been reinforced by authorities, the media, your in-group, even your own justifications. Or maybe the revising information is being blocked externally, as in the case with censorship, either because an authority is controlling the inflow of new information, or there's a natural block to the information, such as, let's say, in the event of being cut off from the outside world from a natural disaster, maybe the electricity is down, the internet is off, the TV's off, that sort of thing. That really was 1 and 2. So 1 is the reduction of new ideas, and 2 is insular spaces. We covered those both together. Number 3 should be really obvious. It's anxiety. Anxiety of some sort must be present in a collective delusion or mass psychogenic outbreak. In the Seattle windshield pitting epidemic, there was anxiety in the culture about the H-bomb tests. There was anxiety about what was going on in Russia. These anxieties allowed for the mind to associate what was happening with the windshield pitting to the H-bomb fallout or the H-bomb testing. This is really important. We covered it last week, but it goes without saying that the actual windshield pitting epidemic helped to diffuse the underlying unconscious anxiety that already existed about the things I just mentioned by focusing the mind on a conscious and plausible explanation. Doesn't have to make sense, but the mind wants relief, so it looks for an explanation. Additionally, with a collective delusion, each individual's psychological discomfort or anxiety, believe it or not, becomes a contagion to others. This in turn causes threat-based reactions, like threat-perceived reactions, which in turn feeds more anxiety and distorts perceptions further. These reactions are hardwired to some degree, so I'm not trying to make it sound like it's not natural and it's bad. But it's really important to understand that with a collective delusion, the individuals in that delusion, their psychological discomfort or anxiety is going to be relieved by finding a plausible explanation, but that same anxiety is contagious to others because of the way we signal each other. For example, if you notice two people looking off in a particular direction, you might do the same thing to see what they're looking at. If they look fearful, you're likely to modify how intently you're looking in the same direction because you want to see what's there. Because fear is a cue and shared through body language, pheromones, verbal utterances, and more. And when you pick up on those signals, you're usually not aware and you're reacting without thinking. It's helping you survive. If you fear the right thing, you pass your genes on. You are successful. This, of course, is a good thing, but also fear causes a shift in attention. It reorders what's valued in that moment, and it causes you to obsess on the distinctions between those in your in-group and those in your out-group. It's about giving you that little extra few seconds to predict a danger, right? If anxiety remains present with no concrete explanation or revising information, so remember number 1 and 2 that we went through, then we start to look for an explanation. The explanation might be rushed or may not be true. It may just come from your neighbor or a media or the book, but it explains your discomfort, helps you make sense of the chaos you've just experienced. It can make it more manageable even, because you can take action, plan something, try something, anything to relieve that state. That's why anxiety is so very important to understand. Think of it like this. If we think back to the Seattle windshield pitting epidemic, imagine a scenario where you're in the break room with your coworkers. You hear them talk about how their windshields have all been pitted. You haven't noticed the pits in your car windshield yet, but your coworkers are swapping stories of when they noticed the pitting and what their theories are of the whole thing. It's in the paper, it's on the radio, even your boss has sent out a memo stating that all employees should cover their windshields just to be safe. You look over and the secretary is cutting up a cardboard box to lay across her windshield. When you look out to your environment now, it's reinforcing back to you that you should do something. You suddenly feel a little sick and a little scared. The current threat marries together with ongoing concerns. So you're looking out, you see a threat. The degree to which you're anxious about that threat has to do with how much that threat marries with concerns you already have. Imagine that you're already overextended, your wife and you just had arguments about bills, you just financed a new car a month ago and the payments were higher than expected, you have a growing family, you have to make ends meet, and now this idea that something's going to pit your windshield and make a costly repair is causing you a lot of anxiety. And the more you think about it, the more worried you get. And as your coworkers talk, you're really forced to think about your situation in context. So you ask your boss if you can go out and check your car, and of course he agrees. And after looking it over and not noticing any dings, you don't think anything else except, well, maybe tomorrow I'll bring my old car to work and leave the new one in the garage for a while. The problem is that the old car breaks down a lot and probably will add more to your overall economic stress than a pitted windshield. But you're really not thinking about that, right? You are anxious about your economic situation, and that anxiety is acute. You have an attentional bias toward threats, and this is blocking you from being more logical or making a logical inquiry into the situation. It actually never dawns on you that the fact that you don't have a pitted windshield might have something to do with the fact that your car is brand new. That's not even considered because your anxiety has limited your thought options. Let me repeat that again. Your anxiety has limited your thought options. That's not scientific, that's just what I say. But in this scenario, you've already started making a plan. Remember I said how plans can relieve anxiety? This is why prepping has become such a multi-million-dollar industry these days, especially since the pandemic. Sell a little fear, and you can sell a lot of products if those products reinforce to you that yes, you are prepared and you have a plan. So let's go over the fourth condition. And I'm going to try to fly through these few really quickly because we're going to cover them in future episodes as well. So the media, past and present, has a unique place in collective delusions because they can transmit and repeat the delusion back to us, thus giving us a sense of validity of what we're feeling. The media can also train people to be reactive and emotional. It has the power to repeat a message over and over in different forms and at different levels of emotional intensity, so it breaks through to kind of put us in this trance. It creates a temporal disassociation and heightened anxiety. And it really keeps the issue in your face. It keeps it ongoing and vivid, and what it really is doing is blocking revising information. That's why if you binge watch things that make you scared on a device, you start to think the world is in a much worse place really than it is. You might even go out and buy another gun. You might even go out and buy more prepping food. But then once you leave the house and go out and speak to your neighbor across the fence, he seems pretty okay. He's not coming after your kids, and he's not coming after your stockpile of prepping food. Anyways, after you've invested some hours in a particular narrative, maybe even argued about it on Facebook, you now have some skin in the game too, and your ego doesn't want to back down, or you can't possibly be wrong, right? How embarrassing. You've already put it all out there what you believe, and the media is reinforcing what you think. And so the chance of revising information coming in is decreasing by the day. Maybe that's why we see such heightened states of anxiety these days. Now, unlike before, we're completely engaged with media and messages in our private spaces like never before. And so the fifth condition that we're going to cover actually is influenced by the media too. The fifth condition is a rapid onset, or maybe even a rapid recovery of physical manifestations. So the illness spins up quickly and dissipates. It spins up quickly and dissipates. This is why it's important, because while in the middle of the illness, one cannot really tell. It's usually after the fact that the reaction de-escalates as quickly as it escalated, and that the MPI is seriously considered. But while the physical symptoms are being felt in a mass psychogenic illness, most people aren't thinking about, oh my gosh, it just came on suddenly, or oh my gosh, it just goes away suddenly. When you take that bird's eye view and look at what happened to a group of people, you then go, oh wow, okay, there was a real rapid onset of this, and then it just suddenly stopped. The sixth cause is that the psychogenic illness seems to spread or is triggered through senses. So it spreads through sight and sound and smell. The more vivid the sensations are around the incident, the more likely the escalations. This is why some enterprising grad students should do a paper on whether or not psychogenic phenomenons are more likely in the summertime when there's more light and color and temperatures are high. Just putting that out there. And herein lies why social media and telecommunications platforms that rely on video and audio could be putting all of us online, especially those highly suggestible and high in trade openness, at risk. I'll cover this more in future episodes, but the one incident that comes to mind when I'm talking about this is the 12 high school girls from Leroy, New York, that developed painful shaking and jerking of their necks all at once. One so much so that she gave herself bruises from hitting herself in the face. The neurologists that treated these girls reported that as soon as the media coverage stopped, they all began to rapidly improve. And I will put a copy of this story in the description below because it's fascinating. We will cover it on this channel. And finally, I have a bonus condition. I wasn't going to talk about it today, but I will. This is the 7th condition. It's the bonus condition, and it's the reinforcing action by authorities such as politicians, experts, or institutions of social control. Naturally, in a crisis, people look for those who know more or have more experience and can help issue reassuring statements, declarative positions, and give them some next steps. Right. Help them have a plan. Help them have a next step to relieve their anxiety. That is why Dr. Fauci and his role, love him or hate him, became a household name during the COVID crisis. The problem with reinforcing authorities, though, is that you might have already guessed it. Revising information might be blocked. Revising information will take longer to reach us through the filters of censorship, either internal or external, or the gatekeeper. This person's the authority, and so we only listen to that person. We also have a tendency to deflect our personal responsibility onto them and project savior-like qualities, which may or may not be deserved. This really puts us in an interesting bind. If the delusion is instantiated firmly within the population, it's under the umbrella of a cult of personality, and the information channels such as social media are repetitive and reactive and divisive, and your in-group adopts all the same habits and ideas to unskillfully deal with their anxiety, and the out-group, who might have revising information, are radically rejected and dehumanized, you really are screwed. And congratulations, you just suffered a collective delusion. Tune into our next episode where I will discuss not only the vision for the parallel structure, but I will have a surprise just for you. You won't want to miss it. I guarantee it. And if you like this episode, as always, don't forget to smash the like button. And until next week, live an uncompromising, not compromised, non-compromised, uncompromised life. And thank you for listening to The Parallel Structure.